Simon and I just finished recording what I believe is at least one of the funnest podcasts that I've ever shot, but also one of the deepest. In this podcast, we obviously start with this concept of property versus stocks. Simon and I sit on similar but completely different sides of the fences with this concept. And in this one, we talk about so much from the history of property over 10 years, 50 years, 100 years versus stocks. We talk about real life examples of what $100,000 would do in stocks versus property in a 12-month period, a 15-year period, and even longer term. But then most importantly, we get into the philosophy and the life cycle stages of being an investor and what we're personally doing, have done, planning to do in these two asset classes. I just love this one, bro. Like, it was super fun to film. And I just think, like, without sounding like a dickhead, like, I think this is one to definitely have a listen to.
Too right. Let's dive in.
To be really honest with you, I'm excited to do this video today because it is the old age debate, and there's just forums and forums and forums of people going back and forth on this. Half of the finance stuff in YouTube at the moment or on the podcast channels is this conversation, and it always has been property versus stocks. And I think the cool thing about you and I getting to do it as brothers is we can be like just super honest with each other. And the cool thing is we have super different but also similar opinions. Like, the similar thing is we both want financial freedom and we understand we need to invest to achieve it. But the path to financial freedom, as you learn more and, figure out what you and your family want, changes. So, yeah, I just hijacked you there. So
No, I just think that, we all really have a decision point at some point in time. And obviously today you're going to get a biased opinion because you're listening to two property investors talk about assets. And at the end of the day, as you said, like, you can't save your way to financial freedom. You need to choose to invest in something, unless you're, some genius entrepreneur or inventor and you can, sell an app for $1 billion. Like, go for it, great. But that's like a
Can you
point
do that?
0.00001% of the population.
Oh, can you just do that? I'll come work for you. Or just hook me up.
I always say,
Daddy.
I say to Tay, I'm like, Tay, go out and create that, $1 billion business for us, and we'll be set. But I think I'd still suffer from the same mental ailments, even if we did have some $1 billion business, right? No money, bro problems.
You would, yeah. I think before we even talk about property versus stocks, there's an important decision that I made. And I made this decision when I was about 24. And this was after finishing uni and living on like $200 a week plus Centrelink, which is about another 160, 180. So I spent 4 years of my life living on $400 a week.
Bro, you'd still be doing that if it weren't for Lisa.
Probably would have. I was a way better surfer. It's way more ripped. It was way worse, dude, but
Just eating those tuna cracker sandwiches.
couldn't help anyone when you when you can't help yourself. But in reality, like, that decision that I made, from work, the funny thing about my degree was there was business in it, there was health promotion in it, which is serving the community, and there was sustainability. So I'm sitting with people that are like, I'm going to go start a $10 million business and kick ass. In the next class, I'm hanging with people that are like, I just want to help every single person in the world. And then it's like, in the next one, it's like, fuck people. They're wrecking the world. Let's just like live off nothing and all become vegetarians and like.
And in that university environment, it's quite polarizing depending on which one of those avenues you're in, right?
Yeah, and I was interested in all three, which is why I was like
doing it,
perplexed, like an incongruent human, and I still am, because I love all of those things.
Yeah.
And the three pills that I realized that most people across, whether you're balling out or wanting to or aspiring to, you just want to serve and help everyone, or you really care about the planet. The thing about investing is you either stay on Centrelink forever, like a lot of the surfers tried to do in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and that limits a whole lot of life choices down the line. And you stay completely outside of the system in that way, and you try and hack it.
You're completely in the system technically, because without the system, you're not getting any money.
You're on the tape. basically.
Yeah, legit. And if that changes, then what are you going to do?
Yeah, and it changed many times. Like many times I had to go to Centrelink and go, hey, stop my payments.
Sure.
Or whatever. And it was actually super stressful.
So it's like a control thing. You know, you want to take control of your own destiny rather than relying on these external influences.
So I realized you can be in completely the system but outside of it by doing that. And I did it for 4 years, like, and then you can be the normal person that we all know and respect and love. Like there's nothing about getting financially free that makes you better or worse than anyone. Like we are all equal as human beings, but you know, you can work to 70. And that's the end point. And there's this ad on TV at the moment, or YouTube, which is the average Australian ends up with 300K, 315 in their super. And so you've got a bit of money in super and then you end up on the pension. And that'll be most people in our generation.
Did they ever say how many years that 300K will get you generally?
Well, you can divide that by like 20 to 100K a year and figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
depending
5
how much
to
you want to
15 years,
spend.
depending on, I don't want to live on 50K at that age.
No, exactly. It's not really freedom. You don't work your whole life to end up having to, you know, scrimp and save at that stage of life.
I don't want that. I want really good healthcare. I want to be super generous to the community. I want to help my family. I do want to travel. I want to live really well at that age. The third option, which is the one that I chose, is figure out how the global financial system works, Ray Dalio style. Like Principles is the book for it. Warren Buffett's HBO documentary is the way to figure it out.
Money Master the Game, the YouTube doco.
Yeah,
The Ascension of Money.
The Ascension of Money, the YouTube doco is phenomenal. Money Master the Game by Tony Robbins is great. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki is great. Like these are all things that you and I have picked up in the last 10 years and figured out.
Which is kind of like we took that on ourselves as well. It's not like our dad or mum or uncle or auntie or friends' parents. Nobody really was like, hey, read this book. It'll change your life. You know, it was sort of you initially went out there and found it for yourself. And, you know, that's the interesting thing about the world that we live in. Nobody tells you to go and figure this stuff out. You know, I went to school from kindergarten to grade 12, got my HSC, went to TAFE, did 3 different diplomas at TAFE, ended up at university and got a commerce degree majoring in management and marketing. And not
What
one
was that
point.
florist thing course you did at TAFE? Is that good?
It was a regret that I didn't continue down that path. To be honest, who doesn't walk into a florist and go, this is the most tranquil space you've ever been in? It smells good. It looks good. You're surrounded by lovely women. It's
I
great.
actually was in one the other day and I said to the chicks that were working there, I'm like, do you just go home smelling like flowers?
I know.
And they're like, we smell like sweat because it's hard work.
And they got cuts all over their hands from the thorns from the roses. But anyways, what I was going to get at is that, you know, 15 years of education, at not one point did anybody teach me about the way that the world works and how money works and how to invest. Like you have to go and seek that information out for yourself to figure it out because, you know, I don't know if we're not meant to figure it out or they don't want us to figure it out or whatever, but
I'll talk about that later in this because I don't want to lose people. I'm going down the rant.
we're going down the rabbit hole eventually.
But you're right, because the third pill, and in the Matrix, right, there's the get out pill, which looks really rough, but you're free. Then there's the stay in it, blissfully unaware pill, but there is a third one in society now, and that is figure out how to become financially free in 15 years through stocks, through property, through something else. I mean, there's dudes figuring it out in 2 years through crypto in the last 10, like phenomenal. And I regret not getting in on it. And going, I'm out, I'm financially free. And now I'm outside the system. I'm in control of my financial future. Then what do I want to do to positively impact the system? And you come back into it through service, through helping others, through living your values, through businesses, through jobs, whatever, through your skill set. So I made that decision because I was working at the time at Oxfam, a phenomenal charity, just volunteering, and everyone was passionate. They were missing key business skills to make it work well, and they were broke as talking about money every day. And I was like, that was the path I was heading down. I just finished up with the local government, state government, Queensland Health, and Oxfam. These are all things I did when I was at uni. And then I'm like, I'm going to save the world was my plan. And then I'm like, oh, these people are not my tribe. No disrespect to Oxfam, because I love it. It's one of my favorite charities in the world. It's extremely beautifully and well run. But I couldn't relate to this idea of busting my ass in that service route with no outcome that's financial freedom. And that's really selfish. I fully get myself listening to this right now. But I'm like, I wanted more than just struggling week to week for the rest of my life.
But do you think that third pill, there is a level of selfishness to it, but that's almost a necessary part of the process as well? Because to get to where you want to be, which is in a position where we can give and give big, you've kind of got to focus on yourself.
You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs in Business 101 is shelter and et cetera, until you achieve self-actualization. And self-actualization is really just a sound mind, a sound body, hopefully a sound spirit, and financial freedom, effectively, like your base things. And then I've said this before, but I believe that pyramid inverts. And when you figure out yourself, you go, oh, it's not about me at all. What the fuck did I just spend the last 20 years obsessing about me for? And then it goes, the start of the new period is service. Who can I help? And the impact becomes bigger and bigger and bigger as you elevate up there. But I don't think you can really, I mean, actually, this is untrue. The most beautiful people I've ever met have nothing.
This is very
The
true.
kindest people I ever met at Oxfam have nothing financially, but they are in service. Everything they're about is other people. So I'm like, I think I did get it fully wrong, but I got to financial freedom in 15 years, and this is my story, and it was through investing. And I think the third pill's the route that I had to go through to realize, shit, I don't want to spend the next 15 years that way. I want to spend it doing my best life.
And I appreciate everybody that can just be of service and just complete sacrifice to the greater good of humanity. And we need those people as, you know, a guiding light, a North Star, like a Thich Nhat Hanh, like a Jesus Christ, whoever it might be.
But we want the best version of ourselves as kindness looks like, and it's beautiful.
There's a but to that, and my but, and this is a selfish but, is there's a reality to this world that we live in, and that is money makes the world go around, and you've got to pay rent or your mortgage, essentially. You've got to pay to get from A to B with fuel in the car. You've got to be able to heat your home up or cool it down if you live in an area not like the Sunshine Coast. It's a pretty epic temperature year round, but like if you're in, you know, parts of Europe, Asia, everywhere else in the world where they've got changing temperatures, you need to warm yourself up. You need to get access to food. You need to get access to healthcare. Like all of these things cost money. So by shutting yourself out from that, then you're not getting access to this. And then, you know, if your cup's empty, you've got nothing to pour from at the end of the day.
And I don't think we're supposed to live just surviving. I believe now that we're supposed to thrive. And I don't think there's anyone listening to this at this stage still that doesn't want to be healthy, that doesn't want a great relationship with their family, their friends, their kids, that doesn't want financial independence, and that doesn't want choices. Like it all just comes back to choices, whether it's property or stocks. And I think that was the decision that I made. And I was actually reading something recently in like Romans. Again, it's not everyone's cup of tea. I get it. And I'm certainly not coming from it from that perspective. But it was, if you were born to serve, and that's the gift that you were given, like our mum, like our best mate, Mickey, Macca, our wives, the kindest people that we know, then you show up and serve. And, you know, for me, I had to think about that. I had to like build a habit and a behavior of putting other people equal to in front of myself, because I always put myself first.
We're probably more warriors than servers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I realized, like it goes on to say, if you're a server, serve. If you're kind, be kind. If you're a leader, lead. If you're great at working with your hands, work with your hands. If you're a math, like, you know what I mean?
Lean into your skills.
It's what you were born to do, do it. And I kind of realized, like, that I was born to go through a fucking bumpy ass path so that everybody listening to this doesn't have to go through it. And so I've chosen the third pill. I've just completed getting out of the matrix without this job anymore in a really minuscule way. Like I'm talking like I can just cover food, home, kids' school fees, you know, cars. I probably would go bankrupt if I had to live off like my passive income, but there's enough there to like if I like reduce my lifestyle, I could survive forever now.
Yeah. And how many billions of people would trade that lifestyle?
Man, my 24-year-old self to be 39, almost 40 now would just be like, whoa, what up? Like, we did it type vibe. And so, now the journey is service. And so in service of everyone listening to this and myself and my kids and my own future, like property versus stocks, like let's just get super real. Like, why did you go property over stocks initially? And then we're going to get into the history of both assets.
Yeah, so same as you. I knew I had a decision point. I'd read all of the books. I knew I had to choose one or the other. But at that stage of my life, the sphere that I found myself in, or the social network that I found myself in, was heavily property. So it's like I lent into my strengths. I lent into my social networks that were going to allow me to succeed in that avenue. Plus, there was a number of fundamentals that really made sense to me. The fact that real estate is a tangible thing. I can see it, I can touch it, I can feel it. It's a real thing, where stocks, it's just a bit overwhelming and confusing. I own a very tiny percentage of this particular company. I have no idea who's on the board. I have no idea who the CEOs are a lot of the time. I have no idea who's in management, who's in operations, who's, the employees. Like, I've got no idea. It's just too big and not tangible, and it's hard for me to relate to. So that was a big one. And, that ownership as well. Like, I know the bank owns my properties at the moment. I've still got debt on them. But eventually I'll pay those properties off. That'll take a long time. But then once I do that, I own 100% of that land, and nobody is going to take that away from me. And if they try to, they're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to be well remunerated for that. So these two things were really the massive pieces of it. And then just the reality that, 8+ billion people on this planet all want one thing. What's that? To have a safe, secure roof over their head and a place to call home. That's not an Australian thing. That's not an American thing. That's a universal global phenomenon. Everybody wants to provide safety and security for their family and themselves. So
Without a doubt.
if everybody wants it, then it's going to be an incredible asset. And once we get into the details in a moment, we can clearly see that. So these are some of the big rocks as to why I chose property. But then some of those little rocks, leverage, putting $100,000 in, getting a $500,000 property exposed to growth, the illiquid nature of real estate makes it a lot less volatile. And because there's so much money tied up in the property markets, that's why gold doesn't fluctuate as much, because there's so much money tied up in gold. And that's why property doesn't fluctuate as much, because it's harder to trade, it's not as liquid, and there's so much money tied up in it. So it's not going to be as volatile. And, I don't need those big emotional swings personally. So these are some of the little rocks, and I just understood it better. It's a pretty simple thing to figure out, real estate, as opposed to stocks. Living in Australia, there's a few markets to choose between. There's 13,000 suburbs throughout Australia, but really you're only ever analysing probably 1,000. And that's a lot less than the amount of companies that you can choose to invest in.
I like that. I think we know what works in property, and that is quality houses close to the CBD or townhouses in the metro markets or the major regional markets, close to transport, close to schools. Like, these are key things that you can hang your hat on and go, well, based on 100 years of history, that's worked.
And I'm sure there's some stock market or share market traders listening to this being like, trading is so easy once you figure it out as well.
Every single friend that I have, or like person in our network that does it through our clients, is just like, once you find the formula, it's the same thing.
But that's me, and like, I was guided a lot throughout my journey, through my mentors, through the people that I surrounded myself with. And, I'm grateful for those decisions. But, why did you choose real estate, and when did that happen?
I distinctly remember picking up that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and going back to just reading it and going, it's just property for me. It's property now, and then it will be business in the future. Just because if he had have said stocks and working for someone else, I probably would have done that. Like, I think it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to something like that. I remember I had a year and a half worth of uni left, and that's when I went and got all of those internships and volunteering, because I'm like, I need to stack my resume so hard that I can get a great job straight away, which I was able to do, so that I could go buy property. And I bought my first two properties in that first year out of uni in Sydney and the Central Coast. But the reason I'm in property now is just leverage. Like, you wouldn't be in property if there was no leverage, because tenants are hard work. Like, I've had tenants go to the point of like burning down my house. Like, that's the worst case scenario, and then everything back from there. Like, I'm selling a property of mine's literally settling in 2 days. Got a call from the agent, like today, like the hot water system's buggered. You've got a mirror on the wall that if you pull off is going to rip off half the wall. So we're just going to throw it in, because it's a $2,000 mirror that I put in as an Airbnb that I'm not getting back. The solar system's not working either. The inverter's broken. And I'm just looking at it and I'm just like, this is just potentially going to cost me like $5,000 to $10,000 on the way out. That, this is just, I suppose where I'm getting to is like, there's tenants, there's maintenance, there's rates, there's water, there's insurances. And now the government's got itself in massive debt. It's trying to like peel back as much land tax as it can get from every investor as well. And so all of those things, and one of the like, property isn't perfect is what I wanted to bring up. Property sort of sucks in a way of like, there's just so many holding costs to it. And even when you own it outright, you're still losing 20 to 35% of that just to someone else. So leverage is the key. And like, the example of this that I wrote down, like, I'm just looking at the whiteboard now. It's, let's say you've got 100K, right? You've got 100K in savings. Now, the property route is you go to the bank. That's a 20% deposit for 500 grand. Let's say it goes up by 7% in year one. You made 35 grand off that same money. Now, in 15 years, if that 500K property goes up by 7% a year, the property is going to be worth $1,379,000. $1,379K from 100 grand down of your own money. Versus, obviously, you owe the bank 400K unless you paid some off. Versus stocks, right? And I think me and one of the boys in the office, and you talk about this regularly, property is a young person's game. Property as a way to live in the future, owning like 6 properties outright and getting a 2% return, absolutely sucks. Property as, a 20 to 50-year-old with like 15, 20, 30, 40 years in the market is phenomenal with leverage. But I don't think I'll be rushing out there at 80, picking up all these properties, hoping to live off the cash flow, because at that point, I want the security of something else without the headaches. Where stocks, right, shares, the same 100K at 7% in year one, you made 7K. 35K versus 7K in the first year from the same money. That's a 5 times better return.
And I think something to point out is obviously there's significant holding costs for that, $500,000 property. So you're not netting 35K with property there, where you are netting 7K with the stock market. So,
but we're not
short
talking
term,
about the 20K that you'd be receiving in rent on the property either, on a 500K property. So it's actually 55K, which goes into eating into a lot of those costs.
Yeah, but it's what I was going to get at is it's not about the first year. And that's with stocks, and that's also with property, because whilst leverage is powerful, compound growth is also powerful.
Compound growth is so powerful, and like Mini Web Tools has a great compound growth calculator people can play with. That's
super simple.
It's super simple. Just put the amount, the number of years, and the percentage return, and just play with it, and you'll feel good about investing. But 15 years, that same 100K that went into stocks or shares at 7% a year compounded, 7% a year is great compounded return. Like, it's phenomenal.
But it's less than the longer term averages in both.
Yeah, and we'll come to that in a sec. A great point. But like $275,000. So you're sitting at $1,379,000 from the 100K in property leverage versus 275K in the same 15-year period. As you said, there's holding costs in property. There's the interest on the way out, on the way through. But you're hundreds of K worst case scenario better off on the same money with the leverage.
Yeah.
If you could leverage stocks at 5 times without them calling you in on margin calls every time the market crashes, then people probably wouldn't be buying houses.
Yeah.
You can't.
And when you look at what the average investor gets in the stock market, even if you look at these hedge funds, these managed super funds, they're on a good year averaging 7%. You know, it's sort of between 6 to 9% is kind of the norm, depending on how risky you want to choose those stocks. So, you know, even the best investors on the planet can't really get an above average return. And, you know, same thing goes for property. A lot of people don't get that 7% return because they may buy emotionally. And you've got to really separate that emotion. And there's so many nuances that come into asset allocation, whether you are investing in property or stocks. There's so many different ways to skin a cat.
Without a doubt. And you know, I think I just take the slow, simple approach because I'm happy, and most people are happy to actually go through the next 15 years. You know, as soon as I started investing at 24, my job became 10x easier. I started to really enjoy work because I realized I was at work to learn skills, to enjoy myself. But every dollar that I made was a dollar that I could save and invest. And it became so much more meaningful once I started to think of myself as not a worker, but an investor that's going to work so that I can get that leverage that I couldn't get if I wasn't working.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, you know, property over the last 10, 50, and 100 years.
Yeah.
Like, because there's some crazy stuff that's happened.
There really is. So the last 10 years, I love that you got Darwin and Byron Bay there.
Just because it's like, we'll start with them.
There's stark differences, you know, like Darwin being one of Australia's capital cities has only averaged 1% per year for the last 10 years. It's been Australia's lowest performing market, probably one of Australia's lowest performing even regional towns.
It's done so bad.
So bad. Where Byron, it's this tiny little cute beach town that's done 15% per year for the last 10 years.
How much of that had to do with Chris Hemsworth and Zach?
Yeah, seriously, right? A lot, I would say. You know, it became like, I think I remember seeing like a Channel 7 or Channel 9 news article that was like calling Byron Bay, you know, the next Hollywood or something like that. It was funny as.
Like, fix up the streets, guys. And
But that was Australia's, like, based on these numbers, like the best performing market over the last 10 years. And I think Suffolk Park, one of the suburbs in the Byron Shire, over the last 20 years has actually been Australia's top performing suburb. You know, I think Jindabyne and Noosa Heads might be close to as well. But then if we look into the major metros, talk to those.
Yes, sorry, man. You can't. That's the Da Vinci Code in front of you right there. It's like, if you can code.
Dude, I would break Da Vinci Code before I could break that code, eh?
What's it called? ASIO, the Australian spy thing. Will be, if you can break that code, you'll be not working here anymore.
I was actually on the phone to a client as Ben was planning for this video, so I kind of came in a bit blind.
Sweet. So, you know, Melbourne isn't one suburb. In fact, you and I just looked at 523 suburbs in Melbourne within 60 k's of the city. Some suburbs that we're looking at for clients at the moment have done 5% a year. Some have done 12 to 15%.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about how to beat the average. No, not how to beat them, how to middle the averages. You know, because it's very hard. How many suburbs you say there was in Australia?
Around 13,000.
To pick Byron, Suffolk Park,
yeah,
you're 1 in 13,000 versus we can show you how to pick a capital city where you like land above average on average that can help.
And even in individual suburbs, you know, there's differences because one suburb may have different zoning laws. So there might be higher density apartments and they naturally have a lower median house price. Or then you might be, for example, in Cleveland, you got Raby Bay and it massively pulls up the median house price because you've got these mansions on the canal. So it's like, there's so many nuances that come into figuring these things out, which is why we focus on the averages and our job as investors is try to average or just beat those averages.
Beat the average is my obsession. So Brisbane's done extremely well too. Some suburbs have done 5%. We just looked at 418 suburbs in Brisbane as well. Somewhere between 5 and 12%. Some of our clients have tripled their money in 10 years. Some of these suburbs have done 25% a year, like craziness. Sydney's the same. Sydney's done a lot better than those two markets on average. Like Sydney has kicked us since the GFC.
Like, why wouldn't it? Like, look at it. All you got to do is fly into Sydney to realize, you know, in my opinion, I've flown into probably over 50 cities around the world. And hands down, Sydney is the most picturesque, beautiful city to fly into.
Nice.
But then it's got everything else on offer. It's not just beautiful and super livable. It's also got an incredibly diverse economy, a relatively multicultural city, you know, compared to globally, maybe not so much, but in Australia, very much so. And you know, got great access to healthcare, incredible education opportunities. You can live out in the west, out Penrith in the mountains. You can live on the harbour. You can live on the beaches. You can just live in the suburbs. You know, it's just got everything on offer. So Sydney is in its own, you know,
It's its own realm.
It's its own realm.
And, you know, in reality, if you ask people around the world, like, what's Australia? If they could mention any place that's not Sydney, that would be like pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like in the reality of the ocean drop that Australia is in the global economy, like we think we're so important, and it's like they don't even like when we're like.
I feel so left out when I listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. It's just like, how can we do this? And we talk to Phil and Akil, and it's like, how can we localize this global scale? Because it's all that matters to me is Australia at the end of the day. But unfortunately, just because of the sheer size of our economy, it doesn't.
Which is great because we're off everyone's radar as well.
Yeah.
And so Sydney's done 7 to 12% with a lot of suburbs doing better than that as well. And so, you know, that's what the Da Vinci Code, we've just cracked it. That's sort of where we're at.
There we go. Now, if we look at the last, I actually just read this morning as well, which is pretty cool. We got a great update. Michael Matusik's Property Market Outlook. You can download it for free from his website or subscribe to his emails. And he looked at the last 20 years of Australian property prices. So this looked at the average property in Australia, which includes your Darwins, as well as your Sydneys, as well as your Byrons and everything else.
And includes a COVID and a GFC, right?
Exactly. Yep. Every single year from 2000 to 2023 was the data. And that average was 6.1% annual capital growth over that 23-year period. So factoring in leverage on top of that, incredible. Factoring in somebody that can beat those averages, obviously incredible ROI.
Phenomenal. You know, 50 years, Simon Presley from Propertyology said 8.2% per annum. And then you and I years ago read John Lindeman's Mastering the Australian Housing Market book, and he reckoned the 100-year average to the date of publishing was about 11% per year.
Yeah.
So what's naturally going to happen? Like I was at a couple of day course with Michael Matusik years ago, and he said that he doesn't believe that the returns in the future will be as strong as the past. And I said, of course not. You know, because incomes aren't matching house price growth anymore. And it's almost like you've got you know how there's like a New York and an LA and a Miami, and then there's an Austin and a middle America, and then there's like just a normal town, and the range can be $50 million to $200K.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane are kind of going to end up being those big centers with 5 to 10 million people in each of them, and then there'll be secondary cities. So
already read in the comments, what about Perth? What about Perth?
Yeah, I love Perth. I miss buying Perth. I've stuffed that up big time.
We won't next time. But looking at were you going to add to that?
No.
Okay, cool. Well, let's look at the stock market, because stock market's also done incredibly well over the past. So the last 10 years, the Australian Stock Exchange has averaged 8.3%.
Yeah.
So great return above those averages. And then the S&P 500 has averaged 13.3% over the last 10 years, which once again is an incredible return. What I would have loved to see there is the NASDAQ as well. NASDAQ over the last 10 years has probably beaten that.
Look, you keep going through them and I'll find it. What's Joe style here?
Jamie, look it up.
Look it up.
30 years, the ASX has averaged 9.2%.
So Joe, it's averaged 19.8% per annum.
Yeah, there you go. And the funny thing is, you know, like we're in this technological revolution at the moment, and it's going to be the biggest thing that humanity has ever experienced. And obviously, you know, that's a major reason as to why like so much wealth has been poured into the space over the last 10 years.
Do you reckon it
Wow.
would be as big as like from walking to like riding a horse or something?
It'll be way bigger than that.
Like
Bigger than the printing press.
from whale oil to like a candle?
It will be. It has to
Do you reckon
be.
it'd be that big?
Yeah, because exponential growth. Exponential growth. It grows over time.
This is my favorite thing to pick apart at the moment. It's like
Is it that different?
it's not different. It's just
Change.
new.
It's a new change.
It's a beautiful thing, and everyone's so worried about it. I'm like, do you know
I'm
like
not worried. Excited.
not and I'm not talking about everyone as
Oh, yeah,
you.
cool,
I'm
cool,
more
cool.
just like talking about like the general consensus of the bell curve of humanity is like more fearful about this than excited. And I'm like, it wasn't that long ago that our great grandkids at 6 were working in mines 100 hours a week, 7 days a week. And then, you know, the Fords and the Carneys and stuff came in and brought in a standard working week of 60 hours and 6 days a week, and children could do that. And then it was like, well, maybe we should do a 40-hour week. And now the Scandinavians figured out a way to make 25, and the kids go to school for like 3 to 4 hours a
So
day.
pumped on property. Well done.
Pumped on properties at 4 days a
Almost.
week.
Yep.
But yeah, like I think what's important is there's, as Phil Anderson says in his great book, not Mastering the Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, there is nothing new under the sun. And especially at the end of a cycle like this, there's always a
new
tech jump.
technology.
There's always a big tech jump, and this time it's crypto and AI.
Yep.
And I think, imagine instead of a doctor diagnosing your knee issue, there's an AI system that's looking at hundreds of thousands of knees and going,
Give it to me.
that one.
Yeah.
And then a machine's going in and perfectly surgically repairing it.
Yeah.
I would love my kids to only go to school 3 to 4 days a week and get to hang out and start businesses and spend more time in nature. I'd love every person in Australia to go to 4 days a week.
It makes our lives so much easier to live, and there's positives and negatives to that for sure. But
I
change
stopped
is
using my like wallet as well. Like if I had a chip in me with all my details,
you're like, where was this shit 20 years ago?
People like, don't chip in me. It's like they've already got the chip in you, man. It's your
The
iPhone.
the chip's already in your pocket. Let's jump into 30 years. ASX has averaged 9.2%, which once again, obviously the longer that you're in it, the better the returns have been, no matter which asset you choose. S&P 10.9. I think it's interesting that there's such a difference between the ASX and the S&P. I think, you know, America's just bigger, right? So that's why there's bigger gains, you reckon?
Yeah, big is better is what the ladies say.
Ben's a MAGA.
America's just like, it's not even
Bigger is better.
520 million people versus 27. It's like, come on.
It's a difference there.
Yeah, and all the big dogs are over there, all the great companies.
Although 100 years, we flipped the switch. So ASX 13% over the last 100 years, with the S&P only at 10.5. But I think these major recessions that have occurred over the last 100 years, the Great Depression, 60s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, has had a much more negative impact. And we actually have studied the history of the Australian stock market as well as the Australian property market. And, you know, you can clearly see that our economy is nowhere near as volatile as the global economy. And maybe this is something to do with just immigration, the fact that we can just open the floodgates, but also natural resources as well, exporting these natural resources that everybody else needs.
And stable government. Like, I really think the stability, the resources, and the immigration. And you look at Phil's book or Akil's book, like the, what's Akil's new one's titled?
The Secret Wealth Advantage.
Sorry, I just lost that completely.
Nah.
That book, he talks about it, so does Phil. Like, when economies, like England ran really well, so did France, when their population was naturally growing. And then as the population hit or started to decline, that's when they had issues. And same with America, like when the population was going nuts, same with Japan. So economies that are growing by 300 to 500,000 people a year, like Australia, normally buffer themselves because there's 300,000 to 500,000 people that are adding to the economy, that are paying to get in here and that need a place to live.
Yeah.
So it's artificially floating Australia, and we're just so lucky that we've got a government that's not exploiting it.
But looking at those returns, like once you factor in leverage, property has clearly beaten stocks over the long term and the short term. But both have generated a massive return on investment, far higher than inflation. So you keep that cash under the mattress and you're done for. But if you put that cash into quality assets over the long term, and the cool thing about the ASX, the S&P, the NASDAQ, it's like you don't have to actually pick that individual stock. You can just go in to the averages, and then when a stock starts to perform bad, they just rip it out and throw a new one in there that's performing well.
I love that. Like, when I read Tony Robbins' Money Master the Game with Ray Dalio, I just realized something that you said before. Like, when they studied 30 years of the top, I think it was 10 or 100, maybe 10 or 30, like, don't quote me on that, but the top companies year on year, like, I'm talking about the Buffetts, like the bridge, like the best companies in the world in terms of the stock pickers, only 2% of them per annum over a 30-year period beat the index.
Yeah.
And so that's why Vanguard's one of the biggest companies in the world now. The iShares, like these things are just aggregate pickers, and the averages work out in people's favor, especially when they're dumping the stuff that's not working out at the bottom.
And the interesting thing is we're starting to see this occur in real estate, and at larger numbers than we've ever seen in history. I think I read a statistic that something wild like 30%, once again, don't quote me on this, 30% of property purchases in the United States during 2021 and 2022 were made through institutional investors. So this is hedge funds, this is 401k funds, America super funds, and it's also real estate investment trusts, REITs.
There's a lot of people that cannot physically afford to buy a property that want exposure. And then every single major stock picker in the world, like whether it's whoever, wants a certain percentage of their exposure to property, but they might not want the physical asset themselves. So it's like you can go buy a real estate investment trust with $1 billion of mixed residential, commercial, retail, industrial under management for $6. And you know what I mean? And get that spread in the American market. And I think, there's smart people that I've known that don't even buy real estate, that just get their exposure to property through that.
What this will inevitably mean, though, is it's going to push property prices further, because if you have these big institutional investors that can have over $1 billion exposure to the market, how are me and you meant to compete? It's almost impossible to compete with these people, because they're coming in with cash unconditional offers from the very beginning, and we're all coming in with our 21-day finance terms and just scraping by with the higher interest rates plus a 3% servicing buffer that they put on top of that to get into the market. So what I see happening here is that will become more and more popular as time goes on, which will push property prices higher and higher, which means the private ownership of real estate will become less and less. And we saw that in the stock market. If you look back 100 years, there was no like picking a certain, like a conglomerate of stocks. It was, you pick an individual stock and you hope that it works out over time. But then as that market grows, they start to come up with these indexes, these ETFs, and that's where, the averages work out heavily in the investor's favor. And that will be the truth with the REITs and things like that as well. But it just means more and more money is being pushed into that asset class, which is going to push up values. And then, that's why I think here in Australia, it makes it so important to do everything that you can to get some private ownership of real estate into your portfolio, because with immigration, the fact that we still have all of these natural resources under the ground, the fact that we've got such a conservative and non-corrupt banking system and government, the show goes on, and we hope that you've said 1,000 times that, we're currently living the Australian dream.
Yeah, completely.
I know for some people it's hell, and I don't want to downplay that a lot, but for a lot of people it's heaven.
Yeah, like there's an opportunity here that I don't think we've seen in Australia for a long time, which is if you want to learn, if you're prepared to go out there and work. Like when I started investing, I was on a graduate program with IBM earning $55K a year. I chose to move back home after living at home for 4 years. I was working a weekend job volunteering. I was also doing projects with the Queensland government, the local Sunshine Coast Council, and doing like a project management
little side hustle as well normally.
100%. Like I was busting my ass to learn and also save as much as I can through 3 jobs. Like I knew what I wanted, and more importantly than what I wanted, I knew why I wanted it.
Was it worth it?
Yeah, 100%. Looking back, like you got to trade at something at some point, and it's like you can trade it slowly over 30 years, or you can get really focused on it for 2, 3, 5 years, like you did, like I did, and get the foundation set up, because there's a rule, and I never understood it. Money does make money. So let's say you've got your first foot in the door with your 500K property with your $100,000 deposit, or from the guarantor. You've got a 500K property, and let's say it just happens to go up 7% for the first 3 years you own it. You've just had a lucky break. You've entered the market at the right time, and it's actually worked. Which is pretty much anyone that's bought a property in Australia in the last 5 years, anywhere really, except Melbourne
And Darwin.
and Townsville. Townsville's done pretty good recently, but you 35K in year one. I'm not going to add this 35 plus,
Don't need to go too deep.
35, 35, 35. We're talking about 110K of equity. All of a sudden, you've made 100 grand outside of your job, not true 100K, but in equity. And you can go back to the bank if your income's high enough, and they'll go, here's 80 grand. And there's your next property. And it gets exponentially easier. That first one is so hard.
Yeah. But then if you also surround yourself with an incredible team of advisors, of mortgage brokers, accountants, financial advisors, buyers agents that can help you understand that complex process of purchasing a property and securing a pre-approval and making sure that you're getting the tax benefits, making sure that you're getting the right asset in the right market at the right time where you have a better chance of getting that capital growth, it just starts to come together in a much easier way. But I want to circle back a little bit about the sacrifices that you made, because I was listening to, and you might have some more to say on this, Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand talking about just shit, really.
They're just right down it at the moment too.
I found it really hard to listen to because they're both so smart and they use really big words that are hard to understand a lot of the time.
Could either of them get a word in with the other one?
It was hilarious, bro. They were really good to each other. They gave each other their time. But Russell would be like, every now and again, just let me go on this one. Just let me go on this one. But they were talking about really the Bible and Christianity, and very, very big Christians now. And it was like the sacrifice and what they believe as Christians is the sacrifice is being human. It is something that is required to get to that next level that we're all trying to get to. And
how well did you do with that hardship? It's like pretty much where it's at.
That's what it's all about. And it's like we live in this world with technology where everything's so easy. It's a comfort crisis, right? It's so easy to order the Uber Eats on your phone. Like, all of the commercials that you see on TV, it's just shit being pushed down your throat constantly. And it's so easy to just be lazy and do nothing, but like the discipline and sacrifice.
ESPN, bro. I'm happy to watch that. Like jam.
Yeah. Get it into me.
You're watching NFL. Like, basketball season's coming up. It's like,
bro, there's an ad there from Michael McConaughey about Uber Eats, and it's like, he's like, it's all like NFL is actually just to get you to eat more food. And it's a funny as play on like the big food. But anyways, it comes down to like discipline and sacrifice. And if you are disciplined and if you make sacrifices for the greater good of humanity, then you are going to be rewarded in some way, shape or form. And it's, interesting to think that, because I think the whole get rich quick, the FIRE community, financial independence, retire early, like everybody puts so much value on that. But I think at the end of the day, it's not what's going to make you happy in the long run. You think about the amount of people that have won the Powerball or won the lotto that have no financial literacy that end up blowing it in the first year that they get it. And it's just, there is a level of sacrifice that's required throughout your journey as a human in order to, become the best version of yourself. And if you're not doing that, then you're really not becoming the best version of yourself. You're never figuring out what you're good at, what your purpose is. And yeah, I guess that's just a little bit of a rant I wanted to go into, just make
that was
people
just amazing, man. I love
realize it's so important.
It is. And, I was saying this to you yesterday, I think, the sooner we recognize that life's never going to be perfect. And in fact, life is actually really hard. Like really hard. Like I had a couple of days because I've been burning the candle, like pulling big days because we're working on some cool stuff in the business, which we'll talk about soon. But I was like, what's my lesson in this? In the past, I would have hooked onto the emotion. I'm like feeling monsterly anxious in my body, not in my mind, just inside that uncomfortable feeling of like, growth. I don't like, why are you making me grow again, man? I thought we had this, like, I thought it was enough. And it's just that feeling. And it's like, well, like, what am I learning in this? And what I think we're all here to learn is like, life is just uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable being wealthy. It's uncomfortable being poor. It's uncomfortable working for someone else. It's uncomfortable working for yourself. It's uncomfortable to have no money. It's uncomfortable to be financially free. Like, it's just awkward. And the second you figure it out, your brain will hang it on another coat hanger and you'll have another drama, or another storm will roll through your life that shakes things up so that you can grow. And I think the only thing is just recognizing that it's all part of the grand design. Yeah, so sorry for the weird in between here, guys. Like, me and Simon just went on a full rant. I love it, but I just don't think it's relevant. No, for me, for this episode, if I was like myself just watching it.
Sometimes we forget that there's cameras recording.
Yeah, I'm just having a chat with you, hanging. I'm like, oh, bro chat. But you know, you mentioned something when we were like just off camera just then, and it was this life cycle thing. So we're certainly not financial advisors or accountants or brokers. This is my personal opinion, right? So we'll talk about like the 0 to 20 phase in a second, because you're across that. I never did anything I haven't done anything for my kids in that phase really. The 20 to 50 phase for me, 20 to 55 is the sweet spot for investing in property. You've got time, hopefully, if you get a long, full life, and you've got money, and most likely you're either single, in an early stage relationship, a serious relationship, or you're just right in it like we are with families. And, you know, if you're right in it with families, you can't go out at night anyway. So you're like learning, you're earning, you're saving, because it's like.
And that's the same for like when your kids go to school as well. Like I really think from, 30 to 55 is like when you really need to lay those foundations and go hard, and you've got the time and capacity because your life is a lot slower.
Yeah.
And 20 to 30, if you can, like how many 20 to 30-year-olds have we worked with that have just, really sped up their journey to financial freedom because of getting started? But for me, like I fucked around massively from 20 to 25, traveling, studying all of these different things, working all of these different jobs, had no direction, no purpose, no understanding of where I'm going to go in life. And that's cool too. Like,
that's all we're doing, man. Just surfing, skating, having fun.
Yeah.
And trying to figure it out, and having a little bit of that angst of I don't know what's coming, but also being hyper in the moment, which is a beautiful time. And for some people that lasts to 40. For others, like we've worked with kids that are 17. Yeah, like, I'm ready to go. Yeah, buy my first, buy my second. So, that stage for me is like where property is brilliant, because you can put the dollar down and you can it's like $5 to $10 back. It's like ching.
Yeah.
Go invest it in high quality assets, and we'll go into like much deeper like our asset allocation strategy for property and how we invest down the line, and we've done it in many previous eps as well. And then for me, what I'm thinking for my situation, and this is based on like just, we've also worked with a lot of people that are balling out that are later phase too, that are like transitioning out of property. And, I think property is phenomenal with leverage, but for me now, like owning a few houses or whatever, the cash flow net is actually shocking based on the property's value. And so I will use property as absolute leverage. And I'm looking at markets in Australia right now, two of them in particular, Brisbane and Melbourne, and they just look so good. Like I just did a previous video on the YouTube channel, which was kind of like 4 or so suburbs for Melbourne. And I'm looking at the quality of these houses for 490 to 620K. And I'm like,
wild.
This is a joke. Like this is $1 million to $1.2 million house that's just happened to sell for 600K.
Sam, cut back to this in 2 years from now.
Yeah, well, it might take 4 to 5, because we know that markets don't win until they show 10%.
Yeah. When
When Melbourne does 10% on average, every man and his dog will tick the approval and it will run. But it could take a while to hit that, which is
we'll see what 1.25 basis point percentage drop in the cash rate does.
Yeah, wait for the fire.
Anyways, we're ranting again. Let's get out of it.
But let's say you own $1 million property outright, and that property is renting for really good money at 16. Let's call it $1,200 a week, 60 grand a year. 6% return sounds cool. Plus, you're still making the capital growth. But as you transition from working phase, business phase to chilling phase, you can't eat the growth unless you want to do what other people recommend. And I would never do it, which is like borrowing money from the bank, slightly increasing the rent, and paying interest to live. And it's like, that's just not for me. I know that's a great strategy, and there's many other BAs and property people that talk that.
And maybe ballers go there because they've got like a, $100 million per year business that can pay for the interest or whatever. But it's not for us low risk investors.
So let's say you get 60K and then you take out 30%. So, you've got $1 million joint owned outright that you're getting 40 to 40 grand if you're lucky to eat, versus going into the stock market and using let's use the last 10 years has been phenomenal. Let's use a worst case of like 7% a year. 70K is what you're going to pull out of the $1 million in stocks without any of that pain and maintenance and bills and calls that you just don't want to fucking get from your
It might be
manager.
a small brokerage fee.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's taxes as well if you want to eat it. But, it's weird that like property is the leverage. And then at some point you probably go, I'm like had a gut full of this after 20, 30 years of doing it.
And as we said, in that phase between, let's say, 20 to 55 or 30 to 55, it is when you are a lot of the time working, earning a full-time income. So at that phase of life, cash flow may not be the biggest issue or concern in your household. For some it is, but for others maybe not. And when you get to those later years of life, what you're wanting in those earlier years is leverage and growth, because you want to increase your net worth.
Yeah.
But then once you get into those later years of life where you want to kick back, maybe not work so hard, maybe go on more holidays, that's where cash is king, and you need the cash flow. Without the cash flow, you're not doing anything. You could have $100 million worth of net worth, but still be in a negatively geared position. You're still forced to work at that time.
Or working 60, 40, 100 hours a week. And it's like, it becomes, even from all of the ballers that we work with that are in that age group, time becomes so important, especially when like you start seeing people around you like not being here anymore. And it's like, the commodity is time. Whether you're 20 or whether you're 80 in investing, your commodity is time. And it took me so long to recognize that that's what this is all about. Choices to do the things that you love with the people that you care about when you want to do them, and to enjoy and fully experience your life by living your values at whatever stage of life you're at.
Yeah, so it's transitioning. But, for my personal situation, and, like I will say this is based on reading countless books, talking to thousands and thousands of investors, sitting down with extremely experienced people. And my personal strategy for myself and my family, I've just had my son Tanner, and the day he was born, I set up a Vanguard account, and I started with putting $5,000 into that Vanguard account. And so, just knowing what I know investing is better. So every single fortnight, I put an extra $100 into that, and that'll continue compounding. And then every single birthday, we'll put a couple of $100 in there again. And then we've decided that in his first 20 years of life, whenever we have a win, like we sell an asset and we generate some good returns, he will also win, and we'll put a little bit more in there. And
Really cool.
what I've realized is by the time he gets to 20, that amount of money will exceed $100,000.
Wow.
And so
that's achievable for a lot of people, right? Like chipping away at it like that.
Chipping away at it, like what would I be spending the $100 on otherwise? Nothing really. So it's just I'm so used to saving, and I'm in a position, very fortunately now, I don't need to save as much as I used to because I'm not in such a heavy acquisition phase. So I've got that surplus income to be able to give to Tanner, and he deserves it because his family.
Yeah.
And so when he's 20, instead of me having to release 100K worth of equity, or, gift him a property, or give him 100K worth of savings at that time, he's already got it. And it
really
hasn't
cool.
felt like anything. So then he can then kickstart it. Now, my hope is that I can educate him throughout those first 20 years of life, through showing him what me and his mum do. And so hopefully when he gets there, he's like, cool, well, I want to do this. And to be real, I'm going to be brutal with that. Like, I'm not going to let him go and spend that on a trip or a liability. I'm going to force him to put it into an asset, but he'll get to choose that asset.
Love that.
So then he gets started with a property at 20 years of age that has really not necessarily affected my life in any way, shape, or form.
No, because you're doing, some people might, when I had my first pub, I had literally like maybe $40 a week left over because I just bought my third property and I went from like a high income job to having to move back to the coast to be with the fam to $45,000 base again and one income, three properties, one kid. And I couldn't have done it. But then when we had our second pub, we're in a better position again. Time had like changed things for the better and we could have done that. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful gift that you can give to all your kids. And then there's nothing better than showing them through doing it. Nothing better.
Like this morning, it was so cute. I took Tanner for a walk. We had the best morning together, but then I come home and he wanted mum again. But I'm like, hey, Tay, I'm just going to do some breath work out the back. So she's sitting on the back deck in the shade with Tanner, and I'm sitting there in the sun doing my breath work. And like, he's watching this from the very beginning. And me and my mate Davo talk about this all the time because, he's at a similar stage of life, a couple of years in front with parenthood. And he said, we talk about this all the time, like actions speak louder than words. Like the kids are going to pick up on what you do, not what you say. So what you do is what matters. So just showing him through action is so important. But to come back to what we believe and what we're personally doing from that 20 to say 55-year age, it's residential real estate investing.
100%.
The reason for that is in the data that we shared with you earlier in this podcast that
1.3 million versus 275K. Like, how much more do you have to talk about than that?
Exactly. And, in residential real estate, choose your poison, right? For me, it's the fundamentals, and I think that should be for everybody else as well. I'm starting to dip my toe into some higher risk, higher reward investments like subdivisions and things like that, but that's not up your alley at all. So that's something that I'm doing in this stage. But then when I get to for me, my 40s or 50s, I will then transition away from residential real estate, and I'll still stay in real estate, and I'll always hold a couple of residential properties because of the gains that I can get. Yep. But then I'll transition into something that's more passive. Now, I don't know what that'll look like. That's still 10, 15, 20 years in the future from where I'm at right now. So the world's going to change a lot between now and then. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but I'll continue learning over the next 10, 15, 20 years, and I'll make an educated decision at that point, which is how can I maximize cash flow in the most passive way that I possibly can? And that will be the strategy for those later years of life. So then I don't have to get a call from my property manager every single week saying that a rates bill is in, your insurance is due, you got to fix up this property, it's time to repaint, like this, that, and the other.
Big time. And I think, someone who's like 39 now, turning 40 this year, my life cycle stage is changing, like even from where yours is at. And there'll be people listening to this that are 30 that are like, man, like me, like I think from the time I was 30 till now, I bought 12 properties or something. I've sold almost all of them. But like I went hard. You've gone bloody hard as well. But now I'm like talking to my accountant and financial advisor more about, well, what are some like tax minimization things? And I won't talk about that. But for me personally, it's like maybe instead of not putting a tiny bit in super, I've been putting a little bit more in super on their advice. And inside super, because I'm so exposed to property outside of super, I'm like just in that, Vanguard, long-term American, Australian, whatever indexes. And at the moment as well, we're just moving across from one bank to the next. And it's like similar to what you've done, like setting up the stock thing. And then just, now that I'm not constantly chasing more property, because I've got a good dose of properties now, and I will be entering the market again, like sooner rather than later, but it's not to go out there and buy 12 properties again. It's to go out there and buy 2 or 3 absolute crackers and just riding the next cycle, which I think you and I know where it is.
Yeah.
And then, just sitting on that is like, okay, cool, I'll hold that for the next 5 to 7 years until it it does what I think it's going to do. I'm just going to say this. I'm not going to mention the market, but I think there's 100% plus growth coming here. And then I'll be, using some of my free cash flow like you to just put some money into the stocks as a 30-year thing, as a 45-year
Get some
thing.
experience, have some fun.
And I'm not playing with it. I'm just doing what I know works from listening to enough stuff. If Warren Buffett says that for his wife, he's got the second or third best history in the market of time. Maybe, there's guys that have done better. But as a business turning over billions of dollars a year guy, like balls on the line, publicly traded company type vibe, like he has done phenomenally well. And if he's like, my team, when I'm dead, I don't expect them to be able to beat the market. I'll put 90% of my wealth into the index. I'm like, it's a pretty clear sign.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, his wife passed away. And so, now he's just
that chance.
giving all that cash away to charity, which is beautiful. But it's like, for him to say that, it kind of says a whole lot.
You've got to take that as gospel almost from the most experienced investor in this generation.
I even think that company can pick the odds.
But I think to round it out, what you need to do is choose something and get as close to becoming an expert at that something as you possibly can, and give yourself decades.
You're not an expert in a year. It's going to take you, I'm 15 years and I'm like at the start of the learning again.
Still learning. And fast forward 20 years, it'll be the same situation, hopefully, because that's the way that the world works. There's so much information out there. You can't consume everything. You can't pretend that you think you know it all. And as soon as you do,
you're dead.
Something's going to happen as well.
Yeah. No, I love it, man. Like, I've really enjoyed this. Like,
we said at the start, this one will be a quick 20, 30-minute podcast, and fast forward an hour and a half, here we are.
Yeah, probably a whole lot of ranting there about different things, but I'm very, very, very passionate about making better decisions for my family. I'm very, very passionate about helping people not smack into the 50 brick walls that you and I have had to figure this stuff out. And there is phenomenal lessons that will drop into these potties, like not lessons from us, but gold nugget pieces of data that the second I heard them went, I'll never invest like that again. And that's what this year's about. Like, hopefully between now and the end of the year, people can come on a journey and go, shit, like I'm really heading into pro investment mindset territory and skill set and knowledge now. Like, hopefully week by week, we can grow together and we can just share like best practice each week.
Let's do it.
Love it, bro. G'day guys, my name's Ben and I'm the director here at Pumped on Property, and I just wanted to say a massive thank you for watching our content today. Now, if you're thinking about buying an investment property in the next 3 to 12 months, then the team and I would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. In that session, we can talk about exactly where you are right now, where you'd like to be longer term, and we can deeply educate you on the Australian market. And then you can take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially become one of the small number of clients that we work with each week. To book your session, all you have to do is go to www.pumpedonproperty.com and click that book your free strategy session button. But either way, we wish you all the best on your journey as an investor to financial freedom.